Hey everyone, welcome to reading class for today. We're going to continue on in our Maniac Magee book. We'll talk about pages 20 to 27 and go on from there. Just a reminder that as we go through this book, to really take your vocab practice seriously, we're going to do the first set of vocab practice today now that we're up to 6 words. Remember, every time you vocab practice, do it not just to get it over with, but do it to learn, right? Doing it to get it over with would be doing a quick practice of the vocab words, taking a screenshot and sending it to me without even thinking about the ones you missed or checking the real answers of the ones you missed. And then you're not going to learn anything doing that, right? And you're not going to get any better at these vocab words. So every day that we practice, today will be the first day, make sure to look at any that you miss and practice those in your head. And then I know by the end of the book, we usually end up with quite a few words, 20 or 30 or 40 if it's a really long book. This one won't be quite as long of a list because it's a shorter book. But if you learn them little by little, by the time the end of the book comes, piece of cake. If you've really been practicing faithfully and practicing the words you missed, versus if you just kind of rush through it and don't even really think about the ones you missed or try to learn them, by the time we get to the end of the book, now you got to learn like 30 words all at once. So a couple of you talked to me about just feeling a little overwhelmed last book, that you're saying, oh, how in the world can we learn 32 words? Well, you really aren't learning 32 words all at once. You're learning like 3 words at a time. And if you think of it that way, by the end of the book, that makes it a lot easier. So my encouragement is, if you struggled with the last vocab test, what can you do this time around on this book to help yourself do better by the end of Maniac Magee? And it's probably just slowing down a little bit every day after you practice and drilling the ones you missed in your head just for 10 seconds each. That's really all it'll take. And then by the end of Maniac Magee, you'll have all the words down, no problem, okay? So if it didn't go real well for you the other day when we took that test, make changes right now, so by the end of Maniac Magee, it does go well. Let's head to that first vocab word, page 16. Infamous is the very beginning of the second paragraph. This, of course, was the infamous address of Finsterwald. Kids stayed away from the Finsterwalds the way old people stayed away from Saturday afternoon matinees at a $2 movie. So a Saturday afternoon matinee is a movie for $2. Many movie theaters will do like a cheap movie in the afternoons for like teenagers. So old people would stay away from that, right? So the Finsterwald's house is infamous. Infamous means famous for something bad. We had a word earlier this year, remember this one? Notorious also means the same thing. Otherwise, you can just put famous for a bad reason. A criminal would be someone who's like infamous. Okay, this Finsterwald house was infamous. It was famous, but because everyone was scared of the guy who lived there, right? They were too afraid to go in his yard. Maw, you'll find on page 18. Same with hallucination. Maw is at the very, very top of page 18. I'm actually going to go back to page 17. This is that poor Arnold Jones guy that the high school kids were throwing into Finsterwald's yard, right? So at the bottom of 17, it says, he's on his knees now, all hunched and puckered. His eyes goggle at the back door, at the doorknob. He's paralyzed, a mouse in front of the yawning maw of a python. So this poor boy, Arnold Jones, has been thrown into the Finsterwald's yard. He's just kind of like tucked up, freaked out, grabbing his knees, just kind of laying there crying because he's so scared, just watching, if Mr. Finsterwald's going to come out his door, right? And so it was like he was like a mouse in front of the yawning maw of a python. Well, what do you use to yawn? Your mouth, right? And so maw literally just means mouth or jaws or throat. And so this Arnold Jones boy felt like he was a mouse in front of a python. Obviously, a big python snake would eat a mouse. So that right there is a metaphor, right? Remember, a metaphor is comparing something to something else without saying like or as. Like or as is a simile, right? The boy was tall like a giraffe. That would be a simile. Or if I just said the boy was a giraffe, that's a metaphor. Notice how this is a metaphor. It just says he's a mouse in front of a python. Now, there's really no mouse and there's really no python. It's just comparing this scared boy to how scared a mouse would be in front of a python, right? So there's kind of a cool metaphor our book uses. Hallucination is in the second to last paragraph, if you don't count that Finsterwaldy's little mini paragraph at the bottom. It says, years later, the high schoolers' accounts differ. One saw the kid from nowhere hop the fence, hopped it without ever laying a hand on it to boost himself over. Another says the kid just opened the back gate and strolled on in. Another swears it was a mirage, some sort of hallucination, possibly caused by evil emanations surrounding 803 Oriole Street. So this is the legend of Maniac Magee, right? Supposedly that day, Maniac Magee showed up, swooped in, jumped over the fence, picked up Arnold Jones, and rescued him, right? brought him out of that yard and actually put him on the front steps. But, the high school kids, like, they couldn't believe their eyes. Some of them thought it was a hallucination. So a hallucination is seeing something that's not really there. Sometimes people who take drugs, obviously that's a horrible, terrible thing to do. You should never do that to your body. But sometimes when people take drugs, they start to see and experience things that aren't really there. That's why drugs are dangerous. They can cause you to do horrible, awful things. Plus, they wreck your body, right? That's why they're dangerous. Or someone who's really thirsty in the desert might have a mirage, see a mirage or a hallucination. They'll see water when it's not really there. Usually it happens to people who are going crazy. So these high school kids thought maybe they were going crazy or something because they saw this young boy jump over the fence and rescue Arnold Jones and not even show any fear, and they couldn't believe it, right? And so they thought they were having a hallucination. They thought they were seeing something that wasn't really there. Another word for it might be dream. So they're dreaming or they're daydreaming. They thought that was what happened. All right, let's talk about what happened in chapters 6 and 7. So what special talent did Mrs. Pickwill have? So she has lots of kids, I believe 10 if I remember right. And, they'd all be playing outside around the neighborhood and stuff. And when it came time for supper, it said she could summon them all with just a whistle. It said it wasn't loud, it wasn't screechy. It was just a 2-note job. 2 notes, high, low, right? And she could just whistle like the perfect pitch that it would carry all over the neighborhood, and her kids would show up just like magic. They could hear it from almost anywhere. It was kind of a special whistling talent. This whole book, I think you can see, is just kind of funny. We call it tongue-in-cheek. It's just kind of a silly book. On top of the fact that it's a legend, right? Some of the facts about this Maniac Magee. Now he's a fake character, but in this book, he's a real character. But this is the people thinking about him and remembering him, and some of the stories about him obviously being stretched. For instance, he probably didn't jump that fence without ever laying a hand on it. That'd be pretty much impossible, even for like an NFL player or something, right? So you can see some of the details about Maniac Magee, because he had existed before this story is being told, have been stretched a little bit, like a legend, right? This whole book is the legend of Maniac Magee. Who showed up for the Pickwill dinner unexpectedly, and why did no one take much notice of it? I think it was unusual. I love this part of the book. It just cracks me up. So Maniac Magee heard the whistle and realized that these kids are being called to dinner. And remember, he ran away, and he ran 200 miles, so he's starving. So he shows up to the Pickwill house and starts eating with them. But no one was like, hey, who are you? Why are you here? They just went on and ate. Why was that? Why did no one really wonder who this boy is? Well, the book told us the Pickwells often helped out people like taxi drivers and other people that needed food they'd invite into the house. Plus, there were 10 kids, right? And it sounds like they often would each, sometimes bring a friend to dinner. And so everyone just assumed that this was somebody's friend or someone that the mom had invited in to help out. And then all of a sudden, when dinner was over, everyone was asking, who was that kid? And they kept going, well, I thought you knew him. Don't you know him? He wasn't your boyfriend? He wasn't your friend? Mom, that wasn't somebody you invited? And they realized nobody had actually invited him, but it was too late. He had run off before they made that realization. So kind of funny. He went to a dinner at the Pickwill house, and everyone just assumed that he was invited by someone in the family, but he really wasn't. Kind of a funny part of the story. All right, chapter 7, describe John McNabb with at least 2 sentences. So here's that baseball player, right? He's 12 years old, but he looks like he's way older. He looks like he's a teenager or something, right? And in fact, they even asked for his birth certificate just to let him play in Little League because they thought he was too old. And even though he showed it, everyone didn't believe that it was really true. So you can picture this like big, strong, burly-looking, teenager-looking guy, even though he's only 12, supposedly. And he was really good at baseball. He was a tremendous pitcher. He could whip that ball so fast that the batters had no chance of hitting it. So number 4 then asked, what amazing feat had he just completed? He had just struck out 35 kids in a row, just whipped the ball past them so fast they could barely see it and they couldn't hit it. So then number 5, describe in at least 2 sentences what happened when Maniac Magee batted against John McNabb. So all of a sudden, Maniac Magee shows up. He's just kind of wandering all over, right? And he finds John McNabb pitching to these kids, and he steps in to try to hit a ball off of him, right? And at first, McNabb kind of makes fun of him and calls him a runt, right? And it looked like Maniac Magee was going to give up, but he actually was just going to the next person in line to grab a batting helmet. Didn't want to get hit, I'm sure, by a ball, and steps in. And so then what happened? John McNabb gave him one of those wicked, crazy, fast fastballs, and Maniac Magee whacked it. He had a really good hit. And so John McNabb kept getting more and more angry, right, and pitching him faster and faster balls, but Maniac Magee hit him every single time. In fact, he even hit a few home runs in a row. And no one had ever done that against John McNabb, so that made him angry, right? John McNabb was used to always striking everybody out and nobody being able to hit him and being the big tough guy, and this didn't make him look like he was very good, did it? So he got upset. And so kind of the funny part of the story, right? He snuck off saying he had to take a whiz. He had to use the bathroom. The book said take a whiz, right? But he wasn't really taking a whiz. He was grabbing a frog, right? He was secretly going off to grab a frog as he was going to play a prank on Maniac Magee, because he was angry at Maniac Magee for hitting home runs off him, right? And then number 6 said, describe what it means that Jeffrey Magee knocked the world's first frog ball for a 4-bagger. So think about in baseball, if you get a hit and you go all 4 bases or 4 bags, you've hit a home run, right? And so Maniac Magee knocked the world's first frog ball for a home run. See, John McNabb threw the frog at Maniac Magee instead of the baseball. And Maniac Magee bunted the frog, did a little tiny hit of the frog, right? And then began to run around the bases. And John McNabb tried to grab the frog to tag out Maniac Magee or throw him out, right? But the frog kept bouncing through his legs and around him. And meanwhile, Maniac Magee, who's fast, you've seen that he's a good runner already, is running all around the bases and gets a home run. So he knocked the world's first frog ball, right, for a 4-bagger. In other words, he hit a home run by hitting a frog. And again, this book is just goofy. I hope you're noticing that. It's just kind of a silly book in many spots. And of course, this is part of the legend of Maniac Magee too. Did this actually happen exactly this way? Who knows, right? This story's probably been stretched in a way too. But there you go. Maniac Magee hits a home run with a frog. Kind of a funny part of the book. So one of the things we've talked a little bit about with this book is the idea of theme. A theme is the main point, or the main point the author wants you to understand and learn. That might be a good definition for a theme. Many times when authors write books, they want you to learn something, learn from the experience of the characters, or learn from things that are said in the book. For instance, one of the themes of Bridge to Terabithia was not to judge someone before you meet them, right? Our main character, I believe the boy's name was Jesse, if I remember right, judged that girl was it Leslie? I'm trying to remember the names now. It's been a long time, but judged her before he ever met her, right? Thought that she was a little bit strange or weird. But later on, she became pretty much his best friend before she passed away. I think there are some definite themes that are going to come out in this book. I'm going to name 3, and I want you to keep watching for these 3 big ideas or main themes that the author, Jerry Spinelli, keeps bringing out. We've talked about this first one a little bit already, right? That stereotypes are bad, especially ones that involve racism, bad thoughts about people from other races. We've seen that a little bit already, haven't we? Where Amanda, for instance, when Maniac Magee is on the black side of town, thinks that it's a little bit strange or doesn't trust him at first just because he's a white kid. But then, she realizes that, he's just a harmless kid who wants to borrow a book. And so we saw also not only stereotypes with racism, but judging someone too early. John McNabb judged Maniac Magee as just a little pipsqueak, right? Oh, he can't ever hit my ball. And little did he realize that Maniac Magee was an amazing baseball hitter and was hitting home runs off him, right? There would be an example of a stereotype that all little kids or skinny kids aren't good at baseball. And Maniac Magee proved that wrong. So the idea that stereotypes, judging someone before you get to know them or assuming that all people are the same in some way, are bad. I think this book's going to really bring that out, especially ones that involve racism. We're going to see a lot of thoughts and feelings between white people and black people. This book was written in a time where racism was a worse problem than it is today. Now, racism in our country still is a big problem, but especially in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s even yet, racism was a much bigger problem in our country, and we even had race riots and things going on in our country's history during some of those years. And so that's when this book takes place. And so not that you can't find racism like this in our world today or in our country today, but especially back then, there were cities like this 2 Mills that were completely almost split between whites and blacks living in different parts. That's called segregation, right? And so this city it's probably like a typical town that you could often find in that time period. Number 2, another theme that I want you to watch for is that small actions can make a big difference. Just going out of your way and being kind, even in just a small way, smiling at someone, helping them pick something up that they dropped, can actually make a huge difference and change the way people think about things or other people. So I want you to watch for that. I think that's going to come out big time in the next few chapters especially. And then the last one that I want you to watch for is the idea that life is too short not to show love to others. Sometimes we waste so much of our life being angry at someone or being afraid of someone only to realize what a silly thing that was for us to be angry over such a small thing or to judge someone and not really get to know them. And now we have less time to get to know a really cool person because we were too afraid to hang out with them before. And they ended up being really cool, right? That life's too short to judge people or to be mean to people and waste time being angry at people. I think you're going to see those themes that Jerry Spinelli really brings out as the book goes along. So keep listening for those as we go and point them out to me, or let me know if you see some of those themes coming out, or maybe you can pick out some more themes too. But I really feel that these are three of the big themes or main ideas that Jerry Spinelli, the author, wants you to pull out of this story and learn from. All right, we're going to read pages 28 to 32 together. Here we go. And how he came to be called Maniac. So now we get to find out about his nickname. The town was buzzing. The schools were buzzing. Hallways, lunchrooms, streets, playgrounds, West End, East End, buzzing about the new kid in town. So everyone's starting to hear about this new kid who's done some pretty crazy things. The stranger kid, scraggly, I mean, he's kind of skinny, carrying a book, flap-soled sneakers. So think about this. His sneakers are falling apart, so the soles, the bottoms flap against the shoe because they're breaking off, right? He looks really poor, obviously. The kid who intercepted Brian Dennehy's pass, hands down, and punted it back longer than Dennehy himself ever threw it. The kid who rescued Arnold Jones from Finsterwald's backyard. The kid who tattooed giant John McNabb's fastball. Tattooed is a fancy way of saying he home runned. He hit it really hard. Tattooed it, John McNabb's fastball for a half dozen home runs, then circled the sacks, the bases, on a bunted frog. Nobody knows who said it first, but somebody must have said, "Kid's gotta be a maniac." Someone else must have said, "Yeah, regular maniac." And somebody else, "Yeah," top of 29. And that was it. Nobody except Amanda Beale had any other name for him. So pretty soon, when they wanted to talk about the new kid, that's what they called him, Maniac. The legend had a name, but not an address, at least not an official one with numbers. What he did have was the deer shed at the Elmwood Park Zoo, which is where he slept his first few nights in town. What the deer ate, especially the carrots, apples, and day-old hamburger buns, he ate. So he hides in a zoo living by the deer. He started reading Amanda Beale's book his second day in town and finished it that afternoon. Ordinarily, he would have returned it immediately, but he was so fascinated by the story of the Children's Crusade that he kept it and read it the next day and the next. Do you know anything about the Children's Crusade? Literally, a group of children were sent to attack Jerusalem and try to take it over because they were running out of adult fighters to have. So check it out sometime. Google it. It's a really fascinating time in history, and that's something that Maniac Magee was really fascinated by, that these children were sent off to war. They never returned, by the way. So they were probably all either lost or killed in war. It's just a fascinating part of history. Check it out sometime. Google it. Anyways, that he kept and read it the next day and the next. When he wasn't reading, he was wandering. When most people wander, they walk. Maniac Magee ran. Around town, around the nearby township, always carrying the book, keeping it in perfect condition. This is what he was doing when his life, as it often seemed to do, took an unexpected turn. So our secret code word for today will be deer, because that's the animals that Maniac Magee is living with in the zoo right now. So deer is our secret code word. All right, top of page 30. Keep reading with us. Here we go. John McNabb had never in his life met a kid he couldn't strike out until this runt. Now, as he thought about it, he came to two conclusions. He couldn't stand having this blemish on his record. And number two, if you beat a kid up, it's the same as striking him out. Uh-oh. So McNabb and his pals went looking for the kid. They called themselves the Cobras. Nobody messed with them, at least nobody in West End. The Cobras had heard that the kid hung around the park in the tracks, and that's where they spotted him one Saturday afternoon, on the tracks by the path that ran from the Oriole Street dead end to the park. He was down by Red Hill and heading away from them, book in hand as usual. But the Cobras just stood there, stunned. "I don't believe it," one Cobra said. "Must be a trick," said another. "I heard about it," said another, "but I didn't believe it." It wasn't a trick. It was true. The kid was running on the rail. So he's running on a train rail, and he's running full speed with perfect balance. Again, legend of Maniac Magee, but was he really doing that? In real life, I suppose. But that's the way they remember it, at least. McNabb scooped up a handful of track stones, the rocks around the tracks, right? He launched one. He snarled, "He's dead. Let's get him." By the time Maniac looked back, they were almost on him. He wobbled once and leaped from the rail to the ground and took off. He was at the Oriole Street dead end, but his instincts said no, not the street, too much open space. He stuck with the tracks. Coming into view above him was the house on Rako Hill where he had eaten spaghetti. He could go there, to the whistling mother, to the other kids, and be safe. They wouldn't follow him in there, would they? Stones clanked off the steel rails. He darted left, skirted the dump, wove through the miniature mountain range of stone piles and into the trees, skiing on his heels down the slope bank and into the creek, frogs plopping, no time to look for stepping rocks. Yet yells behind him now, war whoops, stones pelting the water, stinging his back. Ah, the other side, through the trees and picker bushes, past the armory jeeps and out of the park boulevard, past the Italian restaurant on the corner, the bakery, screeching tires, row houses, streets, alleys, cars, porches, windows, faces staring, faces. So you can just picture him sprinting past all this stuff, right? The town whizzing past Maniac, a blur of faces, each face staring from its own window, each face in its own personal frame, its own house, its own address. Some place to be when there was no other place, top of page 32, to be. How lucky to be a face staring out from a window. So notice Maniac Magee, once again, as an orphan and a homeless kid, sees all these people staring at him from windows, and he wishes he had a safe home to run into. He doesn't have that, right? And then, could it be? The voices behind him were growing faint. He slowed, turned, and stopped. They were lined up at a street a block back. They were still yelling and shaking their fists, but they weren't moving off the curb. And now they were laughing. Why were they laughing? The Cobras were standing at Hector Street. Hector Street was the boundary between the east and the west ends, or to put it another way, between the blacks and the whites. Not that you never saw a white in the east end or a black in the west end. People did cross the line now and then, especially if they were adults and it was daylight. But nighttime, forget it. And if you were a kid, day or night, forget it. Unless you had a business on the other side, such as a sports team or school, but don't just be strolling along as if you belonged there, as if you weren't afraid, as if you didn't notice you were a different color than everybody around you. The Cobras were laughing because they figured the dumb, scraggly runt would get out of East End in about as good shape as a bare big toe in a conversation of snapping turtles. So obviously if you put your toe in a pond filled with snapping turtles, it's going to get bit, right? So picture this, right? Here's this road down the middle of the street. This is Hector Street, right? So we'll call that Hector. And on one side, on the east side, that's where the blacks lived, right? And on this side of the road, that's where mostly white people live. So clearly this is a city that has some racism going on. The white people typically stay over here, and the black people typically stay over here. It's not that they never cross, but at night especially, because there's anger or there's hatred between these two races. Especially at night, you don't go to the other side. So here goes Maniac Magee running from the white side of town into the black side of town, right? And the white kids, the Cobras, who are chasing after him, they just let him go because they're like, oh, he's going to get beat up if he goes over there by some black people that live over there. Now, again, you see stereotyping here, right? Assuming that all black people are going to hate him and want to beat him up, and there might be some, certainly, but definitely you see the racism, the stereotype going on here. So they just let him go. They think he's going to get beat up or something bad's going to happen to him over there. That's why they stopped chasing him. Hopefully that's making some sense. All right, have a good rest of your day and enjoy the next part of the section. You'll be reading chapter 33 to 40 and then answering a few questions about that. Enjoy the book.